I thought the comb was broken, until its seventh tooth unlocked the tray.
She was 19 and homeless. No room, no family, no workbench, just a worn file, and $4 she had saved by skipping hot meals through the last week of November. And with those $4, she bought a condemned horncomb filing shop outside Leominster, Worcester County, Massachusetts. Abandoned since 1937, the north wall had bowed 6 inches outward. Rain entered through a split in the cedar roof. The county closed it on October 14, 2022, and marked it for demolition the following spring. Beneath the horn-softening tray lay a tooth-gauge compartment, unopened for 85 years, holding certificates and a ledger that would alter the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Lottie Crane had been filing her whole life without knowing it. As a child, she smoothed chipped spoon handles, rubbed splinters from the porch rail, and folded school papers until their corners met exactly. Her mother, June, said Lottie noticed what hurt the hand. In their narrow kitchen, where steam filmed the windows each winter, that seemed less like a talent than a way of keeping peace. June repaired horncombs for mill workers, brides, choir women, and girls preparing for interviews. Beneath a green-shaded lamp, she warmed warped teeth over a kettle and pressed them flat between maple boards. Payment came in coins, eggs, or once a jar of blackberry preserves. On Saturdays, they walked 3 miles to the rear room of Silas Crane's cobbler shop, where Lottie's grandfather kept the family's older tools. Silas had a white crescent scar across his left thumb and breathed through his nose when measuring. He taught her to soften horn below a simmer, never a boil, because too much heat raised the grain and spoiled the curve. He showed her how to mark spacing with a steel gauge, cut shy of the line, then bring each gap true with a narrow file. At noon, he opened the same dented tin, rye bread, cheddar, and 1 apple divided 3 ways. June polished finished combs with rotten stone and oil while Lottie checked every tooth against her thumb. A useful thing should never punish the hand, Silas told her. Later, she understood that exact work was a form of mercy. A burr removed, a sharp edge eased, a broken tooth replaced without charge. Small repairs that let a person enter the world without flinching. Silas died during a February thaw, when water ran black along the curb. June wrapped his gauges, files, polishing wheels, and horn blanks in oilcloth beneath her bench. After illness took June 2 years later, Lottie kept the bundle closed. It smelled faintly of machine oil and her mother's lavender soap. Lottie Crane entered the house softly and governed it through disappearance. Bills vanished from this table. June's dresses left the wardrobe. The green lamp was sold, then the kettle, then Silas's lunch tin. Rena never shouted. She tightened her mouth, turned keys, and called each removal practical. When Lottie asked about the oilcloth bundle, Rena said old tools attracted rust and sentiment. By November, the workbench had gone to a dealer in Fitchburg, and the tools with it. The eviction came on November 18, 2022, after morning sleet. Lottie returned from washing dishes at a diner and found her canvas bag on the porch beneath the dead light. Her mother's framed photograph leaned against it, faced inward toward the clapboards. Rena stood behind the storm door, one hand on the latch. "Your little trade will never keep this house." 8 words. Then the bolt slid home. Lottie lifted the photograph. Damp had entered one corner of the frame. June's face remained turned toward the wall, while Rena watched through the glass. That was the betrayal Lottie carried away, her mother's image made to witness in silence. unable to turn back toward her daughter. For 6 weeks, Lottie moved by the cheapest routes she could manage. In Fitchburg, she slept beside a bus depot laundromat, waking whenever the dryers stopped. In Gardner, she spent $3.20 on soup, bread, and a toothbrush, then sheltered beside a church furnace vent until a custodian brought coffee. In Clinton, she slept beneath the windows of a closed library, wrapped in produce boxes. Her money fell from $14 to $9, then $6. She earned $2 sweeping a bakery walk before dawn and lost a quarter through a torn pocket. Cold made every decision smaller. She learned which station benches were watched, which vestibules stayed open until 9, and how long hot water could warm both hands. She slid June's photograph between pages of a discarded road atlas. The worn file remained in her coat, its handle polished first by June's palm and then by hers. On December 29th, she entered the Leominster Public Library to thaw her boots and read the classified pages. Near the bottom of a municipal notice column, beneath tax sales and abandoned vehicles, 3 lines offered one condemned workshop and its narrow parcel for $4, provided the buyer assumed all repairs, liens, and demolition risk. The reference clerk brought her a magnifying sheet. Lottie traced the address with one cold finger. Horncombe Filing Shop, Old Mill Road. Contents included. No warranty of safe entry. She had exactly $4 left. At dusk, she walked to the bus terminal, sold the empty photograph frame for 75 cents, and bought the least expensive ticket toward Leominster. She kept the photograph, the road atlas, and the file. Everything else could be replaced. By morning, the condemned shop would either be a ruin she could not save, or the first door in 6 weeks that no one could lock against her. The bus rolled east before sunrise, its heater breathing weakly through a metal grate beneath Lottie's knees. She rode from Gardner to Fitchburg, then changed beneath a sky the color of old pewter. The second bus left her near Leominster with 37 cents, a paper transfer, and 11 miles still between the station and the clerk's office named in the notice. She walked 6 before darkness came. That night she climbed into a hay barn beyond a frozen pasture, keeping clear of the livestock and sleeping beneath her coat while the temperature fell to 16 degrees Fahrenheit. Hay dust settled in her hair. Each time she woke, she touched the file inside her pocket. At dawn, she followed Lancaster Street north with her boots stiff from cold. Leominster gathered around her gradually. Donnelly's Pharmacy opening its blinds. Prentice Diner sending bacon smoke through a roof vent. Boucher's Shoe Repair, with 3 Riesold boots in the window. The narrow storefront of Cormier Hardware. And Larkin's Bakery, where racks of round loaves cooled behind fogged glass. Delivery trucks moved carefully over salted pavement. No one looked twice at a girl carrying everything she owned. The municipal building stood behind bare maples, square and yellow bricked, with granite steps polished shallow by generations of feet. Inside, steam heat knocked through pipes. Lottie waited beneath a wall clock until a deputy clerk unlocked a half door marked Property Transfers. The woman behind the counter wore her silver hair in a braid no thicker than a pencil. A brass nameplate read, Mrs. Edith Merrow, Assistant County Clerk. She opened the municipal notice, placed it beside Lottie's $4 bills, and studied Lottie's face without pity or suspicion. You understand, the structure is condemned. Yes, ma'am? You understand there is no electrical service. Yes, ma'am. You understand the well has not been tested. Yes, ma'am. You understand the town may order demolition if the north wall moves. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Merrow pressed one fingertip against the bills. This purchase does not provide money for repairs, shelter assistance, or legal protection. I understand. You are 19. Yes, ma'am. The clerk waited, perhaps for an explanation. Lottie gave none. Reasons had become expensive during the previous 6 weeks, and she had learned not to spend them where they would change nothing. Mrs. Marrow drew a deed from a gray file jacket and turned it toward her. The property measured 42 feet along the road and 116 feet to the rear boundary. The building, described as a former hornworking shop with attached warming room, was conveyed with abandoned contents. Mineral rights excluded. Lottie signed in 3 places. Her hand shook only when she wrote Crane. The brass recording stamp came down with a flat mechanical blow. December 30th, 2022. Mrs. Marrow blotted the ink and gave directions slowly. Take Mechanic Street east, past the old rail crossing, then turn onto Mill Street before the river bends. The workshop is beyond the last occupied house, behind 2 black walnut trees. The road sign is gone, but the stone culvert remains. She began folding that deed, then stopped. Crane, she said. Were you related to Silas Crane? Lottie looked up. He was my grandfather. The clerk sat back. Her narrow braid shifted against her collar. He came here once every autumn, brought gauges to be checked against the old shop standards. You knew him? Not well. My father did. Mrs. Marrow opened a lower drawer and removed a ledger whose binding had softened at the corners. She found a page dated October 1988. Beside a recording fee appeared Silas's name and a careful notation. Inspection of surviving filing patterns. Crane family reference set. He said his mother learned in that building, Mrs. Marrow continued. I assumed the shop belonged to someone else by then. Her name? Clara, perhaps. Or Cora. She touched the line, but did not pretend certainty. Your grandfather paid $1 to copy 3 tooth intervals. My father kept the dollar because Silas wrote the measurements around its border. It may still be in this desk. Lottie laid her palm over the deed. Silas had never mentioned Leominster, yet she could picture him beneath the green lamp, breathing through his nose as he measured, carrying home a pattern from a building he believed already lost. Mrs. Marrow placed the folded deed in a cream envelope. The town sold you a liability. Your grandfather, father might have called it something else. Outside, the morning had sharpened. Lottie walked east with the envelope beneath her blouse, protected from the wind. Mechanic Street crossed old mill blocks where boarded windows reflected the white sky. At the rail crossing, she met a man replacing wire on a sagging fence. He wore 1 red mitten and 1 brown. You looking for the comb shop? He asked. When she nodded, he pointed with his pliers. Past my place. Dog will bark. He is loud, not brave. The dog proved both statements. A brindled hound rushed to the edge of its chain, then retreated behind a galvanized tub while continuing to announce her. Beyond the house stood 2 walnut trees, their limbs black and elaborate over the road. Between them, a pair of stone posts framed a track buried under frozen leaves. The workshop appeared slowly as she descended. It was a long, narrow building of red brick and fieldstone, roughly 24 feet wide and 58 feet deep. Cedar shingles had lifted along the eastern roof slope, and a brick chimney leaned slightly away from the ridge. The north wall bowed where frost had pushed against the foundation. Above the door, a weathered board retained only fragments of gold paint. Crane and D-turs, horncombs repaired. Lottie stood beneath it until sleet began tapping the dead leaves. The key from the clerk resisted twice before turning. When the door opened, cold air moved out carrying the dry animal smell of old horn, mouse nesting, lime dust, and iron. Her boots disturbed white filings that had settled into the floor seams like flour. Somewhere in the rear room, water fell at slow intervals into metal. The front room held a counter with a shallow depression where hands had rested for years. Shelves climbed one wall, their doors hanging open. A single horncomb lay beneath cracked glass, its teeth fine as eyelashes. When Lottie lifted it, The curve felt balanced against her palm, neither brittle nor warped. She ran her thumb along the edge. No burr caught her skin. Behind the counter, a door opened into the filing room. Dust dulled 3 benches, but their iron vices remained fixed. Narrow files stood upright in a wooden rack. Each slot had been labeled by tooth width, though damp had blurred the ink. Lottie touched one handle and heard Silas's measured breathing as clearly as if he stood beside her. The back room was lower and darker. A broad, copper-lined tray occupied a masonry platform beneath the chimney. This had once softened horn in heated water before cutting. A locked tooth gauge rested inside a wall cabinet above it. The brass padlock was green with age. Beneath the tray, one cedar support looked newer than the surrounding wood, though even it was gray with dust. The dripping came from a roof split. Each drop struck an enamel basin and left a brown ring. Lottie found a hand pump behind the building, but the handle moved without drawing water. The outhouse door had fallen from one hinge. There was no stove fuel, no blanket, and no food except half a heel of bread saved from the bus station. Still, the shop had 4 walls, a door that latched from within, and a floor. No one could order her to leave before morning. She swept one corner with a bundle of dry weeds, spread the road atlas beneath her coat, and ate the bread slowly. Darkness thickened across the filing benches. The building shifted as the temperature fell. One knock in the roof, a creak beneath the counter, then a long, settling sigh from the bowed wall. Lottie placed June's photograph beside her head and closed her hand around the worn file. For the first time since November, she slept behind a locked door with the key in her own pocket. The shop had been waiting, based on the continuation structure and constraints in your uploaded prompt. Morning entered through the broken roof before it reached the windows. For 3 days, Lottie did not try to understand the whole building. She learned only what would keep her alive inside it. The hand pump gave water after she removed the leather cup, soaked it in the enamel basin, and packed the cracked edge with thread pulled from her coat lining. The first water came brown, the next cloudy, and the 10th bucket clear enough to boil. She rehung the outhouse door with baling wire found beneath the back step. At night, she memorized the floor. 2 quiet boards near the counter, one hollow complaint beside the east bench, and a sharp creak before the back room that sounded almost like a warning. On the 4th morning, she walked to Cormier Hardware, carrying the deed envelope and her worn file. The store smelled of kerosene, pine handles, and iron kept dry through many winters. Coffee warmed on a hot plate beside the register. Behind it stood a broad man with one eyebrow, entirely white, and the other dark. His apron bore the name Eli Cormier in faded chain stitch. "You are the girl in the comb shop," he said. "I bought it." "So I heard." He examined the file, turning it toward the window. "Good steel, bad handle. It was my mother's." "Then the handle stays." Lottie placed 37 cents on the counter and asked what it could buy toward sealing the roof. Eli looked at the coins, then toward the sleet marking the glass. 37 cents buys you 3 nails and regret. I can work for credit." He rested both hands on the counter. "What work?" "Sweeping, deliveries, inventory, anything honest." After a moment, he drew a narrow account book from beneath the register and wrote, "Lottie Crane," across the top of a page. "You pay when you can. You do not disappear. I will not. And you read before you climb." From a shelf behind him, he took a stained manual titled "Repairs for Farm, Mill, and Workshop." The spine had been mended with cloth tape. My father called it free because no one would pay for the handwriting in it. Inside, margins were crowded with corrections, measurements, and blunt warnings. Eli added a chimney brush to her order, along with stove cement, lamp oil, and enough food to last several days. The prices went into the account. A 6-inch wire chimney brush, $3.85. 20 feet of jointed rod, $240. 1 pound of stove cement, 62 cents. Lamp oil, 29 cents a quart. A used canvas bucket, 45 cents. And a sack of oats, 71 cents. No matches charged, Eli said. A person should not owe interest on fire. Back at the shop, Lottie began with the chimney, because the manual's first penciled sentence read, "Do not trust old brick with a flame." She spread a damp sheet beneath the fireplace opening and removed the rusted iron plate above the warming tray. The flue was nearly closed by creosote, old soot, and a bird's nest packed hard against a bend. From the roof, she lowered the wire brush 1 rod at a time, twisting clockwise so the joints would not loosen. Each downward stroke sent black flakes into the tray room. When the brush caught, she did not force it. She pulled 6 inches, turned, and worked again. By noon, soot had entered her cuffs and the corners of her eyes. The chimney released 2 nests, a length of burned cloth, and creosote in brittle scales thick as walnut shells. She scraped the smoke shelf with a bent iron spoon, then used a mirror from her bag to catch daylight up the flue. A pale circle appeared at last. The work took 7 hours. She sealed 1 open mortar joint with stove cement, waited until evening, and built a test fire no larger than her hand. Paper first, then dry cedar splinters, then 2 pieces of fallen walnut. Smoke trembled beneath the opening, hesitated, and rose. The draw held. Lottie crouched near the warmth, without touching it. She boiled water in the enamel basin, stirred in oats, and added a pinch of salt Eli had folded into paper. It was the first hot meal she had eaten at a table since the diner dismissed her. She used a horn-handled spoon, found beneath the counter, and watched steam move through a shaft of fading light. The next morning, she began inventorying the filing room. She chose only what seemed made for hands, rather than machinery. A cast-iron bench vise with leather-lined jaws, 2 bundles of narrow crossing files tied with linen, a brass-toothed spacing rule, a wooden polishing wheel blackened by compound, 3 maple pressing boards scarred with crescent shapes, a horn knife with a curved spine, a jar of rotten stone turned solid with age, and the locked gauge cabinet above the warming tray. Most of the tools bore initials. SC had been cut into 1 file tang. JC marked the pressing boards. On the underside of the polishing wheel, barely visible beneath dust, someone had written, "Clara, 1906, Lottie cleaned each object with a dry cloth and returned it to the place where its outline remained in the dust." She did not sharpen, oil, or polish anything. Silas had taught her that the first repair was often restraint. By afternoon, she reached the copper-lined horn-softening tray. It measured 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, with a drain spout running through the masonry base. Rust had frozen the valve. She tested the tray by tapping along its rim with the wooden handle of her file. The front edge rang bright. The rear edge answered lower. At the left corner, above the newer cedar support, the sound stopped almost completely. She tapped again. Dull, not rot, not solid masonry. Lottie knelt and pressed both palms beneath the tray. The left side carried less weight than the right, though the copper basin sat level. She slid the canvas bucket under the drain, then lifted the empty tray by its handles. It rose 1/2 inch before catching on a concealed pin. The manual mentioned nothing like it. She cleared white horn dust from the masonry ledge and found a cedar disc fitted flush into the stone, no wider than a saucer. Its grain had been aligned with the support so carefully that from standing height it disappeared. At its center was a hole shaped to accept a narrow comb tooth. Lottie took the unbroken comb from the front display case Its seventh tooth was slightly thicker than the others. She inserted it. The cedar disc turned 1/4 rotation. A small iron pin withdrew beneath the tray, and the entire copper basin lifted on hidden hinges. The compartment below was lined with sheet tin. Inside lay 6 packages wrapped in waxed cloth, a narrow wooden case, and a black box with a clasp, but no lock. Nothing glittered. Nothing moved. The objects had the patient appearance of things arranged by someone certain that years would pass before another hand touched them. Lottie lowered the tray and sat on the floor. She waited until her breathing steadied. Then she lifted the basin again and removed the first package. The waxed cloth opened without tearing. Inside were 12 hand-cut files, each thinner than the one she carried, their handles wrapped in dark horn and marked by use. The second bundle held raw horn plates, pressed flat and separated by linen. Though dry at the edges, the centers remained sound. The wooden case contained 3 tooth gauges, a bow drill, a narrow saw, and a polishing scraper made from a piece of broken straight razor. The fourth package held June's green-shaded lamp chimney. Lottie stopped with both hands beneath it. The glass had a smoke mark along one side. At the base, June's initials had been scratched with a needle. Lottie remembered Rena carrying the lamp from the house, its cord wrapped around the stem. She had believed it sold with the bench. Somehow, before that sale, or long before Lottie understood what was being protected, June had returned part of it here. The fifth package contained a repair ledger, bound in brown cloth. Names filled the pages in different hands: mill girls, seamstresses, school teachers, widows. Beside many entries, the price column carried a single line instead of a number. Mabel Drew, interview at Foster Mill, no charge. Evelyn Pike, school ceremony, no charge. Ruth Mercado, morning comb repaired, no charge. The last wrapped object was a rectangular tin box sealed with cloth tape. Lottie softened the adhesive over steam and lifted the lid slowly. Savings certificates lay beneath the layer of tissue, each folded inside an envelope. She arranged them by date, checked the names, and added the amounts twice on the blank rear page of the municipal notice. The total was $28,900. Beneath the certificates sat a small coin purse. It held 9 Morgan silver dollars, 14 Barber half dollars, 6 Indian head cents, and 3 Liberty head nickels, all darkened by time. At the bottom lay a bronze purple heart engraved with Thomas E. Crane and the year 1944. A letter rested under the metal. The envelope read, "For the one who opens the gauge." Lottie did not open it. She returned the certificates to their envelopes and counted the total once more. $28,900. Enough to repair the roof if spent carefully. Enough to leave. Enough to become dangerous if mistaken for permission. She placed the letter beside June's lamp chimney and carried the metal outside. Night had settled over the walnut trees. Beyond the rear boundary, the river moved black beneath a skin of ice, its open channel reflecting one narrow strip of moonlight. Lottie stood there until the cold reached through her boots. The money remained inside. The unread letter remained inside. For that night, it was enough to know the hidden compartment had not been empty, and that someone, decades earlier, had prepared it to be opened without force. The shop had been waiting. At first light, Lottie brought the letter to the front counter and set June's lamp chimney beside it. The envelope had yellowed along its glued edge, but the writing remained dark and slanted. She knew the hand before she knew why. The capital C leaned forward exactly as it did in Silas's notes, though this script was finer, with a small pause before every final stroke. Clara Crane. The name beneath the polishing wheel rose in her mind. Lottie warmed water, cleaned soot from her fingers, and opened the envelope with the horn knife. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found the tooth gauge beneath the softening tray, then the shop has outlasted my fear, and perhaps my name. I am writing from Worcester, Massachusetts, where Dr. Nathaniel Bell has told me the pain in my chest is angina pectoris, and that I should expect less time than I had planned. Doctors speak gently when they have nothing gentle to give. You should know whose hands came before yours. Abel Crane began filing cattle horn in Bolton in 1812, when comb teeth were still cut one at a time by candlelight. His daughter Mercy brought the work to Leominster in 1849 and taught her son Josiah, who built this shop in 1878 beside the water. Josiah's daughter Clara, born here in 1878, is the woman writing to you now. My son Silas was born in 1919, and if he lives long enough, he may carry the gauges after me. 4 generations are not a claim upon you. They are only proof that patient work can travel farther than the person who begins it. The trade closed on October 3, 1937. Celluloid combs had already taken much of the market, and the last horn order was too small to cover coal. The benches have stood silent for more than 30 years as I write this. Silence does not mean the work was worthless. It means the world chose speed. My husband, Edwin Crane, was killed in France during the First World War. Our son Thomas later served in the Second World War and did not return from the fighting in 1944. His medal lies with these papers because grief should not be displayed merely to prove that it happened. Take it into daylight when you are ready. If you choose to work horn, heat it in water held between 150 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Never boil it. Press softened blanks between maple boards for 12 minutes, then leave them weighted until fully cool. Mark broad comb teeth at 8 to the inch and dressing teeth at 16. File from both faces toward the center, so the edge will not split. For polish, mix 2 parts rotten stone with 1 part light oil and work slowly across the curve. A hurried shine often hides a warped tooth. The certificates are not payment for blood or obedience. They are saved wages, repair money, and the remainder of Edwin's insurance. Use what is needed to keep rain from the tools and frost from the walls. Do not spend it merely because it is there. The ledger will tell you why this place mattered. A comb cannot give a woman courage, but it can keep one small humiliation from following her into a room where she must ask to be seen. Inheritance is not possession. It is the decision to leave a tool cleaner, a measurement truer, or a door easier to open than you found it. You owe us no imitation. You owe yourself honest work. Behind the shop, beyond the walnut trees, there is a low fieldstone marker bearing Edwin's initials. It faces east because he always rose before the sun. If the stone remains, clear only enough moss to read it. Some things should continue to show their age. Light the green lamp if the chimney survived. Silas knew where I placed it. I hope he understood why. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Clara Mercy Crane March, 12/1971. Lottie read the letter twice. The second time, she heard no hidden instruction beyond the words. Clara had not demanded restoration, family loyalty, or gratitude. She had left temperatures, ratios, names, and permission. Lottie folded the pages along their original creases. The paper settled easily, as though relieved to return to its old shape. She placed the letter inside the ledger and tied both with the linen cord that had held the narrow files. Then she went through the back door. Snow had hardened overnight. She crossed beyond the pump and passed between the 2 walnut trees, following a shallow depression toward the river. Brambles caught her coat. Near the property line, a low shape rose beneath lichen and dead fern. The fieldstone marker was no taller than her knee. She brushed loose snow away with her glove, then used the wooden back of the horn knife to lift one edge of moss. EC appeared first, Beneath it, the date 1918 had been cut with a blunt chisel. The letters were uneven, one deeper than the other, as if made by a hand that had stopped often. Lottie cleared no more. She stood facing east. The morning sun had not yet reached the ground, but the upper branches of the walnuts held a thin amber light. Inside again, she fitted June's green chimney onto the base of an old kerosene lamp found in the filing room. The burner wheel resisted, then turned after one drop of oil. She trimmed the wick square, filled the reservoir, and struck a match. The flame rose too high. She lowered it until the green glass held a quiet circle of light over the counter. Under that lamp, the repair ledger changed from a record into a chain of hands. The custodian in Gardner, who had brought coffee without asking her name. The bakery woman in Clinton, who paid $2 for a walk that needed only 10 minutes of sweeping. Mrs. Marrow, who had kept Silas's measurements instead of treating them as waste. Eli Cormier, who had placed matches outside the account because fire should not begin as debt. None of them had rescued her. Each had made the next hour possible. Perhaps you remember one small kindness that arrived when you had no way to repay it. A meal left near you, a ride offered without questions, or a person who spoke your name carefully when the rest of the day had made you feel invisible. Tell us about that kindness in the comments, if you can. It may remind someone else how much a small act can hold. That night, Lottie wrapped the files in their waxed cloth and placed them beside her bedding. The ledger rested beneath June's photograph. Clara's letter lay between them, protected from the floor by the road atlas. The green lamp burned until the room was warm enough for sleep. The first snow came on December 2nd and measured 6 inches against the north foundation by noon. Lottie read the roofing chapter 3 times beneath June's green lamp. The shop roof measured 26 by 60 feet when she included the eaves. Allowing for overlap, waste, and the damaged eastern slope, she calculated 16 squares of cedar shingles, 4 rolls of felt, and nearly 40 pounds of hot-dipped nails. The figures frightened her less once they were written in columns. Eli delivered the first load in his truck and placed a short roofing hatchet on the counter. Its handle was dark with sweat, and one cheek carried 3 shallow notches. "My brother used it 30 years, he said. He is past needing it. A former roofer named Walter Ames arrived the following morning. He was 71, narrow as a ladder, with a left ear folded from an old fall. He examined the roof from the road, climbed halfway up, and came down without haste. "I cannot," Lottie said. "Did not ask." For 11 days, they worked beneath changing weather. Walter showed her how to sister the split rafter with straight spruce, clamping the new timber tight before driving bolts through both pieces. They snapped a chalk line across each course and kept the shingle joints staggered so water could not find a straight path downward. Lottie learned Walter's 3-stroke method. Set the nail, drive it nearly home, then finish with one light tap so the shingle remained free to swell. "That nail's proud." Lottie checked it. "Pull it." She did. By the 5th day, her shoulders trembled when she lifted a bundle. By the 8th, she could carry one from ladder to ridge without stopping. Walter refused coffee until the eastern slope was watertight. Eli brought felt, nails, and 2 extra bundles, without mentioning the account. They finished on December 14th. Snow began again as Walter drove the final ridge nail. Lottie stood in the attic while flakes gathered overhead and listened. Nothing struck the floor. January exposed what the first fire had hidden. Bricks near the chimney crown had begun to spall, their faces peeling away in red flakes. Inside the attic, mortar crumbled to powder when Lottie touched it. Walter would not climb in winter, but he lent her staging planks and told her where to brace them. Eli found hydraulic lime in the rear of his storeroom. Lottie mixed 3 parts clean sand, 1 part hydraulic lime, and 1/4 part fire clay for the inner joints nearest the flue. She dampened each cavity first so the old brick would not draw water too quickly from the new mortar. For 3 weeks, temperatures remained in the 20s. She worked in short intervals, carrying warm bricks from beside the stove and setting them before they cooled. Her bare hands went numb every 15 minutes because gloves dulled her sense of the joint. She would climb down, hold her fingers around a mug, then return before the mortar stiffened. 2 bricks cracked during placement. A third slid inward and dropped soot across the hearth. Lottie removed each failure instead of hiding it behind a thicker joint. On January 27th, she built a test fire from newspaper, cedar, and 1 dry walnut split. The flame drew toward the throat immediately. Outside, smoke rose clean from the repaired crown without leaking through the attic or curling beneath the eaves. Lottie watched it from the road until the last gray thread disappeared. The filing room floor was white pine, fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails, whose dark heads sat unevenly beneath a century of dirt. Lottie rented a random orbit sander for $14 a day. Eli made her promise not to tip it onto its edge. She pulled each proud nail, reset the loose boards, and drove the rose heads just below the surface with a narrow punch. Then she sanded in 3 passes, 80 grit to remove grime and splintered fibers, 120 to level the scratches, and 220 to close the grain without polishing it. So smooth, the oil could not enter. Dust covered the walls, the shelves, and the inside of her sleeves. She kept the heirloom tools wrapped in waxed cloth and changed the lamp wick after each day's work. The first oil coat disappeared into the boards almost at once. The second remained visible for several minutes. The third she applied thinly with a folded cotton rag, working toward the door so she would not trap herself. She left the room untouched for 48 hours. Under the cured oil, the pine shifted from dull, dark honey toward a deep mahogany brown. The old wear marks remained. So did the shallow crescent where a worker's stool had turned for decades. One morning she woke before dawn and could not make herself lift the sander. She walked to the marsh instead. A great blue heron stood in shallow water with one leg raised, still enough to resemble a piece of weathered wood. Lottie watched it through the entire gray morning. When it finally opened its wings and crossed the creek, she returned to the shop and did no work that day. The floor waited without accusation. 8 windows remained in the building. 3 had no glass. 4 were cracked from corner to corner. 1 pane, wavy and faintly green, had survived since 1788 after being reused from an earlier workshop. Lottie marked that sash with chalk and removed it last. She scraped each rabbet without cutting into the old wood, brushed on linseed oil, and bedded the replacement panes in DAP 33 glazing putty, warmed between her palms. The glazing points went in flat, 2 to each side on the smaller panes and 3 along the longer edges. She rolled the final putty into narrow ropes, pressed them against the glass, then drew the knife in one continuous stroke to form a clean bevel. The sash cords had rotted inside their weight pockets. Eli supplied 1/4-inch cotton cord. Lottie tied each end to the iron counterweight with a figure-8 knot, checked that the knot seated beneath strain, and measured the cord so the sash stopped before striking the pulley. The preserved 1788 pane carried bubbles no modern glass would allow. She cleaned it with warm water and a cloth, leaving the faint scratches at its center. On the last afternoon, she raised the final sash and felt it remain wherever she placed it. Outside, a chickadee landed on a walnut branch close to the window. Its claws closed around the thin bark. For several seconds, bird and girl regarded one another through the old green glass. Then the chickadee flew, and the sash stayed open. The walls near the chimney had been patched many times with horsehair plaster laid over hand-split oak lath. Lottie's first repair failed before breakfast. The second sagged by noon. The third cracked around the edges as soon as the stove warmed the room. She removed each patch completely, brushed the lath clean, and dampened the old plaster until it no longer pulled moisture from the new mix. Eli brought an old burlap bag from his shed. Horsehair clung inside it in pale, twisted ropes. "My father saved everything that might bind," he said. Lottie separated the hair, soaked it, and mixed it into lime plaster until the fibers spread without clumping. She pushed the scored scratch coat between the lath so it curled behind the wood and formed keys. After it firmed, she added a 3/8-inch brown coat and gave it 72 hours to cure. The finish coat went on 1/8 inch thick, drawn smooth with a steel trowel dampened at the edge. The repaired wall was not perfectly flat. Neither was the original. These patches will hold another 100 years. She set it quietly, then cleaned the trowel before the lime could harden. Doris Bell owned Prentice Diner and wore a yellow pencil through the knot of her gray hair. Twice a week, before Lottie woke, Doris left a paper bag on the doorstep. One held biscuits and 2 boiled eggs. Another contained bean soup sealed in a canning jar. Lottie carried the empty jars back and placed coins beside the register. Doris pushed the money away with the flat of her hand. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." She did not ask whether the shop would reopen or when. Caleb Ames arrived on a blue Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 15, long-limbed, and missing one front tooth. Walter had sent him to cut the fallen walnut limbs into stove lengths. Lottie offered him 50 cents from the small amount she had allowed for labor. Caleb shook his head and set another round upright. "My mother said, 'About your grandfather.' That was all." He split wood until dusk, stacked it bark side up beneath the repaired eaves, and rode home with the maul across his shoulders. Reverend Boyd passed the workshop each morning on his way to the hospital. His black overcoat shone at both elbows, and he carried no umbrella even in rain. For weeks he only tipped his hat. One cold Monday, he stopped beside the open door while Lottie was carrying plaster water. "May the work endure," he said. 4 words. Then he continued down the road, leaving no tract, invitation, or expectation behind. Lottie postponed the cellar until February 11th. The door beneath the back stairs opened onto 7 granite steps, worn shallow at the center. She carried the green lamp down 1 step at a time, testing each tread before trusting her weight. The cellar measured 12 by 15 feet. Its fieldstone floor sloped toward a clay drain, and the walls held the mineral smell of underground water. At the center lay a dressed granite slab, unlike the surrounding stones. A carved comb with 9 teeth marked one corner. Lottie brushed the grooves clean. She did not try to lift it. Under the 3rd stair, her lamp caught the edge of a small oak box wedged behind a loose stone. The lid had swollen shut. She worked it free with the horn knife, moving around the seam until the wood released without splitting. Inside lay a brass key whose bow had been shaped like a horn comb. Beneath it rested a tintype wrapped in muslin. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the workshop in the summer of 1903. She wore a white blouse with the sleeves rolled above her wrists and held a narrow filing frame against one hip. The building behind her was new, the roof straight, the sign complete. The woman had Lottie's eyes, not merely the same darkness or shape, but the same slight narrowing at the outer corners, as if both were measuring something before speaking. On the reverse, written in brown ink, were the words Clara Crane, daughter of Josiah, age 25, summer of 1903. Lottie carried the key upstairs and set it on the mantel beneath the Purple Heart. She tried it in the gauge cabinet, the ledger clasp, the cellar door, and the small lock on the rear shutters. It fit none of them. The key remained on the mantel. She did not know what it opened. Snow withdrew from the foundation in dark granular bands. The creak grew loud enough to hear from the filing room, and the walnut branches softened with green catkins. Lottie opened the windows each afternoon and let lime dust, lamp smoke, and winter leave together. She decided not to begin full comb work that spring. The old horn blanks were too valuable for impatience, and memory was not the same as mastery. She chose one worn silver dollar from the coin purse and recorded it in the ledger before spending any part of it. With the money, she bought scrap horn, fine abrasive, fresh polishing oil, and 2 narrow files. She cut only small samples. Some curled under heat. One split because she filed outward instead of toward the center. She kept each failure in a wooden tray and wrote the cause beneath it. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Lottie completed the first horn comb she believed deserved to leave the workbench. It was 6 inches long, curved gently to follow the hand, with broad teeth on one side and fine dressing teeth on the other. She had softened the horn at 156 degrees, pressed it between Clara's maple boards for 12 minutes, and left it weighted until morning. She cut shy of every mark. She filed from both faces toward the center and polished the curve with rotten stone and oil until the surface held light without glare. At one tooth, her thumb found resistance. She returned the comb to the vise and worked the burr away with June's file. Only then did she write the date in the ledger. The restored filing room remained modest. The benches were level, the chimney drew cleanly, and 8 repaired windows admitted winter light. Clara's photograph stood beneath the green lamp. The old tools occupied their original outlines, while Lottie's newer files rested separately in a plain rack. No wall had been made to look young. On December 19th, while clearing ice from the path, Lottie noticed a narrow brass plate fastened to the older walnut tree. Bark had grown around its edges until only one corner showed. The plate bore the same 9-tooth comb carved into the cellar slab. She brought the brass key from the mantel. It turned once. A shallow compartment opened inside the tree, lined with tarred cloth and cedar. Within it lay a folded 48-star American flag, protected by oilskin, and a note written in Clara's hand during the Second World War. "Thomas leaves tomorrow," the note began. "He asked that this flag remain here until someone can unfold it without asking war to make him noble." Clara wrote that her son had learned polishing before he learned to shave. He could judge a warped comb by laying it across his palm. He had enlisted in 1942, not because the family approved of war, but because he believed other families should not have their doors broken by men who considered cruelty a right. If he returned, she intended to give the flag back to him. If he did not, it was to remain with the shop until a future keeper could carry his medal without turning his death into decoration. Lottie read the note beside the open tree. Snow gathered in the folds of her coat. She did not unfold the flag there. On May 27, 2025, Memorial Day, she carried Thomas Crane's Purple Heart and the folded flag to the Massachusetts Veterans Memorial Cemetery in Winchendon. A cemetery representative helped her confirm his service record and placed a small marker beside the family memorial stone. There was no speech. Lottie stood until the morning ceremony ended, then returned the medal to its case and brought the flag home. By then she had used 3 silver dollars and 1 barber half-dollar from the purse. 1 paid for practice horn. 1 bought a replacement file. 1 covered lamp oil and mailing envelopes. The half-dollar paid Caleb to carve a set of wooden polishing pegs, after he finally agreed that skilled work should be paid. The remaining coins were wrapped again in cloth. Lottie placed them beneath the savings certificates and added a note in the ledger. for repairs that preserve the work. After that, for the next one. Most of the certificates remained untouched. Interest and legal paperwork were handled carefully through a local bank, with Mrs. Marrow witnessing the original record. Lottie used enough to reinforce the North Foundation, insure the building, and keep the taxes current, nothing more. The shop reopened without an announcement. Doris pinned one index card to the corkboard beside the diner register. Horn combs repaired. New work by request. Leave name and address. By the end of the first month, 43 names had been written in Doris's small receipt book. Some wanted broken heirlooms repaired. Some mailed combs wrapped in handkerchiefs. One woman asked for a plain dressing comb to give her daughter before a nursing interview. Lottie completed only what she could finish honestly. There was no storefront rush, no newspaper feature, and no waiting line outside. Parcels arrived by mail. Finished work left in brown paper, with care instructions written by hand. Caleb returned that spring carrying a cedar board beneath one arm. He had grown taller and replaced the blue Schwinn with a used truck that coughed at idle. Without explanation, he leaned a ladder against the front wall and removed the weathered sign. The surviving letters still read, Crane and D. Turs. Caleb worked beneath the walnut trees for 2 afternoons. When he lifted the board into place, the new words matched the depth and spacing of the old carving. Crane and daughter's horn combs made and repaired. Lottie looked up at it. "There is only one of me," she said. Caleb wiped cedar dust from his shirt. Not what the sign means. He would not explain further. In October, Lottie opened Clara's ledger to a clean page and began a letter of her own. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote that the roof had been repaired without hiding its age, that the old glass bent afternoon light across the floor, and that the creak still grew loud in spring. She recorded the heat range for softening horn, the cure time for pressed blanks, and the mistake most likely to split a fine tooth. She did not write that hardship made a person worthy. She wrote that hunger could narrow judgment, that loneliness sometimes disguised itself as independence, and that accepting a bag of biscuits could be as necessary as learning to sharpen a file. She listed Doris, Eli, Walter, Caleb, Mrs. Marrow, and Reverend Boyd. Then she left several pages blank. The shop had been waiting. Near the end of her letter, Lottie explained where she would place the wrapped coins, the remaining certificates, Clara's note, and the newer repair ledger. She asked the future reader to preserve the 1788 pane if possible, and to leave Edwin's marker partly mossed. She made no demand that the trade continue. A person might inherit the shop and choose another exact, useful work. The benches could serve a bookbinder, a clock repairer, or someone whose craft did not yet have a name. What mattered was that the door remain easier to open than it had been for her. One evening, she carried the completed letter to the back room and placed it beneath the copper softening tray. The cedar disc turned smoothly with the 7th tooth of the old display comb. She closed the compartment and lowered the tray. Outside, rain darkened the repaired shingles. Water followed the restored gutter toward the creek rather than entering the walls. Lottie locked the back door, crossed the filing room, and turned down June's green lamp. The Horncombe filing shop waits. It has always waited. At the county clerk's office, Mrs. Marrow eventually retired. Her replacement emptied the lower drawers, discarded several broken pencils, and found an old dollar bill pressed flat beneath the 1988 ledger. Measurements surrounded its border in Silas Crane's narrow handwriting. The new clerk placed the dollar in a clear sleeve and returned it to the drawer, where it remained beside the deed record for the $4 shop.